I was waiting for the other Jordi to sit down. Hello and good evening, one and all. Bon après-midi, good afternoon, one and all. It is my pleasure to be sharing this workshop, this online workshop, organized under the leadership of the Barcelona City Council Department for Historic Memory and myself, the director of the Observatory for Democratic Memory. Well, we organized this session called Colonialism, Heritage and Colonial Heritage in Barcelona today. This workshop counts on the participation of all the team of the department. Montserrat Iniesta, by the way, I would like to say hello to Montserrat Iniesta from the Born Centro de Cultura y Memoria in Barcelona. As you all know, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the workshop will have to be carried out online. The conference will have to be 100% online, and not only us, the speakers, but also the participants can follow us through Zoom, and the session will also be broadcasted through a YouTube. There are two sessions, one in OV and another one in English from the European Memories Observatory of Universitat de Barcelona, where we have been working for quite a long time now on international conflict and the main problems that public policies on democratic memory are going through. And we also have networks in Latin America, not only in Europe and other parts of the world. And the aim is to come up with projects to remember, right? To have memory at the center, placing, of course, the focus in our own geographies, but also by working together with partners from all around the world. And we also want to, of course, place the focus on the situation in Barcelona and to enhance our collaboration with Barcelona City Council. The majority of us, well, we live in cities and we experience conflict with our own past and with the public space, which is the forum where citizens experience their crises, their conflicts, but also where they share values and where we socialize. The debate on this colonialist inheritance is a discussion that has gained stamina during the lockdown, I would say, this summer. Well, after the lockdown, rather, but also in Barcelona, well, the focus has been placed in historic memory for quite a long time now. As you know, a statue of Antonio López was withdrawn in Barcelona through a public participation process. Of course, Barcelona has a very dark past, and I believe that we should not be accepting our past, or at least not accepting it proudly. As you know, in the US, there are many world forums where social movements and unrest are somehow laying this conflict on the table. And Jordi Rabassa, the representative of the Barcelona City Council, will tell us more about this point, right? But of course, there needs to be a public agenda that somehow facilitates the process of recovering democratic historic memory at the global level. It's been now a while that professors and academics from all around the world focus on the fact that the colonial past in Europe has contributed to the idea of Europeanness, one would say. I would say that we here in Europe we're rather Eurocentric, and I am sure that in the upcoming 3 days we'll be discussing about Eurocentricity. And unfortunately, we are still victims of racism and xenophobia against migrants and citizens from different parts of the world. I'm sure that the topic will be on the table in the next few days. I would like to thank, by the way, all the speakers for accepting this session. And I don't know if these policies for democratic memories can be enhanced or pushed forward from institutions and Well, I don't know to what extent these are prophylactic measures and can somehow respond to today's problems. As you know, thankfully or unfortunately, there is an increasing number of political parties represented in parliament that are extreme right wing, and somehow they feed such narratives and discussions. The observatory, hand in hand with the city council, has accepted the challenge to celebrate the conference, to discuss about the colonial past and the very important repercussions that the past has had on the present. And we'll also be discussing, because of course, there's on one hand the symbolic role of the statue of Mr. López, but also there's another big dilemma that Barcelona faces, which is the monument to Cristobal Colon. And of course, we wanted to play this easy word game, this literal word game to entitle the session Colonialism, right? I don't want to take more of your time because for sure the important part is when we hand it over to experts. So let's go for it. Thank you very much to all the participants. Jordi Rabassa, I'll be giving the floor to Jordi Rabassa right away from the Department for Historic Memory of Barcelona City Council. Thank you very much for the initiative, and please grade your team and thank them for their work. And well, even if we haven't had the chance to count on the participation of Montserrat Iniesta, what a pity. I would like to thank her as well. I would like to thank my team, Ricard, for his immense work, Oriol, who will be facilitating the first panel discussion, and more importantly, Dr. Celeste Munoz for her facilitation of the session, and Fernanda for the logistics. Silvia Pala, the interpreter, and her colleague. The online interpretation thing, I don't know to what extent it's easy or not. For us teachers, it's sometimes difficult to teach online, so I don't know about interpreters. It's a curiosity that I have. And well, of course, thank you very much to all the participants from different countries. It's a pleasure to host you, and for sure this will be a critical moment, right? And for sure it's not going to end here because the debate on uncomfortable memories, memories related to colonialism and symbolic moments related to in our country and in our continent. Thank you very much. And Jordi Rabassa, the floor is now yours. Thank you very much, Jordi. Thank you very much for your kind works and for your kind introduction. Thank you very much for all the work on your side, on EUROM's side, to prepare the session. We are 100% convinced that the session will be worth it. This session, this workshop will be food for thought to critically rethink public space, to question the art that we place in our public places and that accompanies us, citizens of Barcelona. As you said before, I am the representative of Ciutadella, a neighborhood in Barcelona, a very central neighborhood in Barcelona, a neighborhood where all migrants have traditionally reached and where more of half of the population live. When we think about what represents us, it's clear that things have been changing radically in the last few years compared to when some statues and monuments were raised that aimed at representing power, right? Monuments are always a representation of dominant classes, of ruling classes. If history is written by the, I mean, who are the winners? Who've been the winners? Sorry, if history is written by winners, that's what I wanted to mean. To mean, who are those that have been defeated? Who were the defeated ones when Antonio López monument was raised, and where are the defeated today? There's no doubt that in Barcelona, there are many parts that could be considered the defeated. But of course, it has to do with social class, two alternate social classes. Antonio López monument was already offensive when his monument was raised, but today it's even more uncomfortable to have a monument of his. He represents exploitation, racism, colonialism, and imperialism. That's why we need to think who is watching at public art here today in Barcelona, and how can we challenge amongst us all the different historic narratives and the narratives that somehow want to tell us about the official city. How can we challenge these narratives? So this workshop follows the logics of a workshop that was carried out a couple of years ago under the commission by the Commissioner Ricard Vinyas, who implemented a couple of workshops on colonialism to open a reflection about the topic about colonialism, and that concluded, even if it's not 100% true, well, this seminar somehow, Jordi is laughing, well, as a result of the workshop, the monument was withdrawn from Antonio López Square. But there is still an Antonio López Square, and I'm to be blamed. I'll do my best to change this situation. So this is a continuation of these two workshops on colonialism, and we decided to celebrate this conference after understanding that in Chile, the popular unrest and the popular demonstrations focused very much on the action against monuments, which ended up with, covered by graffiti and by they were like dressed up. Monuments were dressed up in the Chilean unrest demonstration. So Chile was a first source of inspiration, but then came the Black Lives Matter movement, and with it, different actions were carried out and imposed on colonialist monuments and statues. What do these statues represent today, and what did they represent when they were raised? What was the Barcelona that these monuments wanted to broadcast? Because, of course, the statues are grandiose, and at the end of the day, they are power mechanisms and control mechanisms over public space. Do we really want to preserve such monuments in Barcelona? So that's a big question mark that we'll try to answer a little bit during the following 2 days. You'll be discussing about public art in Barcelona, which was a colonial metropolis for a long time. In the past, this was considered a strength of the city. Barcelona ranked amongst the important global metropolis, colonialist metropolis. Later on, this reality was hidden, or yeah, somehow hidden. This colonial past was hidden under the carpet, and I believe that today it's important to bring it on the table, bring the topic on the table, because only by understanding our past and who we've been, will be able to have a 100% democratic city, because public art per se belongs to all citizens. And this means that the fact that public art is somewhere doesn't mean that it has to stay there forever. It's also true that the session is not understood as a session to discuss about whether we want the monument here or not. I believe that this workshop, there is like a radical option to get rid of a monument, and then there's the possibility to redefine the meaning of certain monuments, even if sometimes it's almost impossible, or perhaps we can accompany monuments with actions to give a background, to get rid of the less democratic elements, because the public forum needs to be democratic and represent all citizens. All citizens need to feel comfortable in the public space. So in order to feel comfortable in a former colonialist city, with public space, with power, of course, a powerful city, because not all Barcelona's public art is related to colonialism nor imperialism, but there is an important amount of monuments that do. So as Barcelona City Council, we believe that we need to tackle this reality and we need to reflect, we need to have a critical thinking and understand what's done in other cities around the world. And that's why I would like to thank all the different speakers that have agreed to be part of the session and also to all the participants. From my side, that would be it. Thank you very much. I hope that the conference is going to be extremely fruitful. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks to Born Centre de Cultura and Memoria. Thanks to EUROM. And we believe that for sure this will not be the last conference on the topic because it's a broad topic. Public and colonialism, a very broad and timely topic. Make the most of the conference. I hope it's going to be very fruitful and interesting. And let's critical thinking inspire us when it comes to implementing sound public policies on the topic. Because, of course, a public debate, a theoretical debate is complex per se, but then grounding theories on public policy on the ground is not easy. And of course, there's management and implementation of public policies can sometimes be uncomfortable, and political parties don't make the job any easier. But of course, the critical analysis has to be available to see how it can be grounded. Without further ado, I would like to hand it over back to Jordi Guixé and make the most of the session. Thank you.
Gràcies, Jordi.
Thank you very much, Jordi. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Oriol López.
Hola, bona tarda a totes i a tots. Aquesta sessió serà en anglès, per tant, convido a les assistents que vulguin o que requereixin de traducció simultània que la icona que apareix a sota de tot, que és una icona d'un globus terraqui, doncs la poden activar per rebre la traducció simultània en català o castellà. Well, we'll give start to this first panel discussion of this heritage and colonial memory in today's Barcelona conference. Thank you to the Barcelona City Council to make this conference possible. Thank you also to our colleagues from Melbourne and EUROM, Fernanda, Ricard, and Cel. And last but not least, thank you, of course, to the four speakers of this panel discussion. It is a real honor to have all of you with us, and thank you for your time and to share with us all your knowledge. As you probably know, the link between the city of Barcelona and the slave trade was largely unknown until recently. But the truth is that in the 19th century, the city received a huge amount of incomes coming from those fortunes made by businessmen in the Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, basically. In that time, in the 18th century, Spain held a large colonial empire. And these properties were, let's say, exploited by enslaved people. So the money made in the colonies in the next century, in the 19th century, was invested mainly in the city of Barcelona within the Iberian Peninsula. And these, of course, brought consequences that still today are a clear evidence on the streets, where we can find monuments, street names, or even buildings linked to that uncomfortable past, if you want, or awkward past. Well, but this is the case of Barcelona. But today in this first panel discussion, as I was telling you, we want to open the scope, to broaden a bit the scope, and to learn from those international perspective that our speakers can shed light on. So we will start with Anna Milosevic. Hi, Anna. Anna is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Leuven in Belgium, and a specialist in memorialization processes. So today, Anna, you will shed light again on the experiences that you've been doing research. Please, Anna, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I hope that the interpreters also can hear me well because I don't have my headphones. I'm so sorry about that because I'm currently in Italy in Airbnb, so I do not have access to headphones. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me to speak about this very, very important topic that lies really within my heart. And this is a topic that I have been also exploring with my students in Leuven, where I teach course on memory politics. As a first speaker, well, my topic actually for today would be to explore some kind of corrective measures when it comes to memorialization and the link with colonialism in urban space. But this is quite a ungrateful task because first I have to start actually with providing some kind of answers to the issue that is at the hand. But before I do that, I would actually like to say a few words about the issue itself, about memorialization of colonialism in urban space. I would like to explore also why this is an issue, so why we are talking today about this and not maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And then I would like to maybe offer some kind of ideas on what are the possible corrective measures. So what is the issue actually at the hand? The issue at the hand is actually that we have in the last 30 years discovered that there is this huge and massive underrepresentation of minorities in public space in terms of monuments, public commemoration, memorialization in general. And this underrepresentation of minorities is not only about ethnic minorities or racial minorities, but also underrepresentation of maybe sexual or religious minorities that live in a country. The issue at the hand is also that for many, many years with the nation states in Europe, we have had this top-down politics of memory that hasn't been actually challenged by no one, whereby we had narratives that were imposed to the communities. And what we have seen in the last 20 years is this sort of democratization of memory. So what this democratization of memory actually entails? It entails, among other things, to add some kind of new layers of knowledge about the past experiences, about our histories, about the way we have lived our past, but it also entails some kind of critical assessment of our histories or the ways in which we remember the events. And often these events were, for many, many years, were remembered only from one certain point of view. So this democratization of memory, as I said, would actually entail some kind of critical thinking and critical examination of the past, as the two first speakers actually explained. So why we have to critically examine the past? I'm going step by step now. So why we should critically examine the past? Why we need this democratization of memory? Is it just a question of identitarian politics, or there are maybe some other motives? So first of all, by critically examining the past, we can not only add these kind of new knowledges, new layers of knowledge to the history, but we can actually maybe try to provide some sort of acknowledgement, justice for the victims, for the communities that were part of those histories, but maybe are not included in official memory politics. So what actually is happening with the process of democratization of memory is that we have this kind of a clash between what is the official politics of memory and what are these new knowledges of the past that we actually haven't been aware of. So the problem, the main issue, I think, lies in the ways in which the official politics of memory has been contested and by whom is contested. Of course, if we talk about colonialism, we can see that in a number of cities, in a number of countries in Europe or around the world, Many memory activists are actually trying to start a number of initiatives. They're doing a number of activities that they are trying to raise awareness on these issues, on past injustices, et cetera, et cetera. But we have also seen a number of diaspora organizations, such as, for instance, diaspora organizations in Belgium, which is a colonial power, that have been quite active and quite imaginative in providing a number of activities with an aim to raise awareness of the crimes that were committed in Congo and in Africa under the Belgian colonial power. Of course, what kind of contestation we have? What kind of contestation we have when we talk about monuments, what kind of contestation we have when we talk about museums and renaming of the streets. Well, there are a number of cases all around the world that actually suggest that the contestation can be peaceful. As I said, when maybe a non-governmental organization or social actors promote these kind of activities with an aim to raise awareness, add new layers of knowledge to the actual politics of memory, we can talk about peaceful contestation, because the aim is not only to raise awareness, but also to provide some sort of educational tool for the global public that maybe is not aware of the issue at hand. But we have seen also in a number of cases that contestation can be also violent. For instance, in South Africa, a number of monuments that are built to roads are violently contested by the broader public, by the students, by a number of organizations that deal with colonial history of South Africa. For instance, there is in Cape Town, there is a huge mausoleum of Rhodes that overlooks the entire Cape. And there is this huge statue of Rhodes that a number of protesters were trying to sever his head, or they cut his nose. Some of them have defecated also at the place of the monument. I have seen that with my eyes. So there is a number of ways in which people actually contest these monuments, but also they can organize as groups or like-minded individuals, not necessarily that come from diaspora organizations or civil society, but as ordinary citizens. They can gather and they can reunite around some kind of idea or some kind of a project, like renaming of the street or the contextualizing a certain monument. So in this case, we have an organized and a kind of a lawful, in a certain sense, contestation. Because the actors that are involved in the contestation process, they try to provide actually a solution on an idea and a concrete objective on how this monument or statue or a street can be renamed, reused, removed from the public space. So this brings me actually to the corrective measures that I can maybe classify as examples of positive action and maybe examples of negative action. So I will start maybe with the negative action. So I think that the most drastic way of dealing with contested monuments is actually to remove them from the public space. So I think this is a quite controversial idea, but I hope that you will also have questions about it. I think it's a quite controversial idea that, you know, like monuments that in some way offend people should be removed from the public space. I think they should not. I think that we should, there are ways that we can get creative and use those monuments actually to learn from the past and find ways to decontextualize actually what has been for many years the official narrative of that place or monument or that person. So removal is an example of negative action for me, but also there are other examples of negative action. For instance, vandalizing a monument, destroying a monument, hiding a monument from the public space. In terms of positive action, I think that in a number of cases, in a number of countries that have dealt with authoritarian regimes or have dealt with totalitarian regimes, we can see people and institutions, but also the states themselves, inducing a number of actions that try to deal with the past and deal with what are the remnants of that old politics of memory. So if you think back maybe of countries in Central Eastern Europe, we have seen that many of them have renamed and constantly maybe renamed their streets, their squares. They have induced a number of laws as well to deal legally with the past and to legally deal with monuments. So if we think about maybe Ukraine has passed a law that actually removes Soviet-era monuments. This is one of the examples. But countries that were once colonial powers, like Belgium, for instance, they have only recently discovered ways, or they're exploring, let's say, ways to deal with that past. So in terms of how Belgium maybe is dealing with the past, because this is the country where I come from, where I live actually and work, I think that the most intriguing examples were maybe the statue of Leopold II. And the second example is, of course, the African Royal Museum in Brussels. So in terms of museum, let's start with the museum. For many, many years, that museum was heavily criticized by researchers, by people who visited the museum, because the way that the permanent collection was presented without critically engaging with the questions of Belgian responsibility for the crimes committed in Congo. And secondly, also a number of researchers have also raised question about the provenience of the artifacts that are in the museum. And these artifacts were mainly imported or brought directly from Congo by individuals that have lived there. But these artifacts raise really important question about ownership, actually, of the museum or these artifacts. So Belgium, a couple of years ago, decided to close the museum and critically engage with its narrative, the narrative of the museum, because most importantly, a couple of years ago in the old, let's say, museum, you would go to the museum, and the entrance of the museum, there was a huge statue of a European explorer with a black child, and with a huge writing, "Belgium brings civilization to Congo." So as you can imagine, this was quite offensive for a number of people. So in a new, renewed museum that actually claims to be decolonized, the statue has been moved from the entrance into a hole that actually, into a, let's say, a part of the building that tries to critically engage with these questions, and they try to decontextualize a bit the statue and explain the issues behind it, etc., etc. So when I bring my students to the African Museum in Tervuren, we actually have a really nice talk about whether they think that this museum is actually decolonized, and in what ways. Some of them, my students are mainly Belgian students, some of them actually use my course to visit the museum for the first time in their lives, although they live in Belgium, and they have no deep knowledge about the Belgian colonial history. So they are really active in engaging with these questions and exploring the topic. And I'm really happy to discuss this with them. So at the end of the semester, actually we discuss whether this museum has left some kind of a new knowledge, has given them some kind of a new knowledge about their own national history? And the answer is quite positive, I might say. Although me as a researcher, I still think that the museum doesn't, in a clear manner, engage critically with Belgian colonial history. My students think that this is already a positive step, and it provides them some kind of a new knowledge they never have thought about. The second example I mentioned in Belgium is the one of the statue of Leopold II that is actively contested, and I would say every day, in a number of ways. People throw paint on the statue, people write petitions, so they, in a legal, lawful way, they are trying to contest the memorial, the monument, and actually they are asking the removal of the statue from the public space. So this is most important statue of the Leopold II, but there are a number of other statues of people who were active in exploration of Congo and exploitation of Congo in Brussels or in Belgium in general. So for instance, you know, like the Belgian government just recently formed a commission to critically engage with the question of colonialism, and especially in the public space. But it still surprises me a lot that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium is actually in the street that bears name Rue des Colonies, the street of colonies. So as you can imagine, this was quite a shock for me. But people actually do not critically engage with the past if they do not see that there is a public demand for critically engaging with the past and re-examining the past, at least in Belgium. What are the possible solutions, as I said, in terms of positive measures? Yeah, I'm finishing, yes.
Yeah, you have 2 more minutes.
In terms of positive measures, as I said, we can think about decontextualizing by adding this kind of new knowledge or new ideas or explanations to the monument or the museum itself. For instance, I gave a course to the mayors of mid-Norway last year. They are dealing with an important issue because they discovered that the place of their most important and most sacred place in their national history, there is a monument made by the Nazis. So they were already preparing the commemoration for 1,000 years since the event. And they were actually asking me for ideas how to deal with this Nazi monument that is really close by. So, of course, there are no global solutions. There are no copy-paste models, as we have seen in United States, that every monument deserves its own special attention, and every monument and every statue and every street name that causes concern, that is a matter of contestation, should be addressed in direct contact with the authorities and in direct contact with the local population, especially not only with civil society actors. So I think that one of the first ways, one of the most important ways actually to engage critically with the past is actually to engage in consultations with the people that are in direct contact with monuments, statues, and museums in their close neighborhood. So I think I will stop there.
Okay, Anna, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience as a researcher and also as a teacher or professor with us. So now we will pass to Miguel Cardina. Miguel is a researcher at the Center of Social Studies. He's the coordinator of a research project called Crossed Memories, Politics of Silence, the Liberation Colonial Wars in Post-Colonial Times. And Miguel will address the case of the Portuguese colonialism memories. Miguel, the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you. Well, I do not have the video.
Maybe the host can help you to put the video on. Fernanda, please.
Sorry, I cannot help. Miguel, you have to find the microphone icon on your
Yes.
and open it, and then on the side, the other side, you have the video start video button.
Yes.
So you click here, and we will be able to see you. Okay.
Yes, but it's not possible because
I cannot open it for you. I'm sorry.
Okay, I will speak. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate in this moment. I will speak about the Portuguese case, particularly the debate, the current debate about the colonial past in Portugal. Hoping that it will contribute to a comparative dialogue with other contexts. In recent years, we are facing a re-emergence of the debate about colonial representations in Europe. This is not unprecedented, but it has taken now a new relevance. Colonial nostalgia that has prevailed in former European metropolis has now been simultaneously challenged and maintained in the current discussions on slavery, racism, and empire. In fact, some of its visible expressions are centered on formal apologies regarding the colonial violence, the debate about museums and restitutions, the contestation of statues and monuments in the public space, and so on. At the same time, this critical wave has also made evident the material and symbolic prevalence of colonialism in post-colonial societies. I would like to start this presentation by evoking a particular monument in Portugal, in Santa Combadão. The monument, which you can see on the screen, is entitled Monument to the Heroes of the Overseas, Monumento aos Heróis do Ultramar, and was inaugurated in 2010 in the town of Santa Combadão. It recalls directly those young local combatants who were killed in the colonial war. The conflict, as you may know, occurred between 1961 and 1974 and led close to 800,000 young Portuguese to fight in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea. About 500,000 Africans were also integrated into the same Portuguese troops to fight the liberation movements. The war would end with the birth of 5 new nations in Africa: Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, São Tomé e Príncipe, and Cabo Verde. A regime change in Portugal during and after the Carnation Revolution, and the return, mainly from Angola and Mozambique, of around 500,000 Portuguese citizens. As you can see, the monument is divided into 7 vertices, each one corresponding to an old colonial territory. At the center, there is a verse of Luís Vaz de Camões from the epic poem The Lusíadas, Os Lusíadas. E aqueles que por obras valerosas se vão da lei da morte libertando. Something like, and those who by valorous deeds free themselves from the law of death. So we have here, in that particular monument, the simultaneous presence of a celebratory and painful memory of the empire. It is part of the recent and very prolific process of monumentalization of the colonial war in the country. In fact, within EUROM project, and that I'm now coordinating here at the Center for Social Studies in the University of Coimbra, there is a PhD thesis going on by André Caiado, and the provisional figures of this new wave of monumentalization are really, really impressive. Throughout the country, around 300 monuments were built in the last 10, 15 years. Returning to this particular monument, there is another interesting element worth to mention. Santa Combadão is the birthplace of Salazar, the dictator who ruled Portugal for much of the 20th century, and the square where the monument to the heroes of the overseas is located previously had, in the same exact spot, a statue of Salazar, which in 1975 would be damaged and later removed. So Celeste, could you click, please? Because there is an image of the statue of Salazar, and that is the statue was damaged during the Carnation Revolution, and it was located in the same exact spot. The two monuments are very different and made in distinct historical contexts. But I think that putting both in parallel allows us to illustrate one of the dominant features of the memory of the 20th century in the democratic Portugal. Putting it briefly, if Portuguese democracy was distanced itself from the memory of dictatorship and Salazarism, nothing similar occurred regarding the memory of the colonial past. In Portugal, as with other former European colonial powers, the memory and the oblivion of colonialism comes in multiple and not always evident ways. In the country, the pervasive presence of the so-called Luso-Tropicalism still exists today. The notion of Luso-Tropicalism was created by the Brazilian intellectual Gilberto Freire and was appropriated and politically explored by the Estado Novo in a particular historical context. I can talk about that later, in the 50s, to portray Portuguese colonialism as more benign and less aggressive than other colonialisms, Spanish colonialism, Dutch colonialism, British or French colonialism. Nowadays, the presence of a colonial imaginary influenced by this picture strongly defines the dominant national ontology. The evocation of the imperial history occurs mainly through the code word discoveries, descobertas, or descobrimentos. The term refers directly to maritime exploration in the 16th century, but its public uses transcend this historical circumscription. In Portugal, speaking of descobrimentos, descobertas, discoveries, is often synonymous of a generic epic past of which the Portuguese should be proud. There are many examples of this that I could list here. For instance, the Expo 98 in Lisbon, thematic parks, Portugal dos Pequenitos in Coimbra, or a new thematic park that was inaugurated in 2014 in Porto, World of Discoveries. Memorial complexes in the cities, such as Belém in Lisbon, and discursive mobilization of the imperial past in politics, in sports, in tourism, in advertising. If colonialism disappeared as a political reality, it still persists as an operative representation, weaving a bond between nation and empire that continually reproduces itself in the national memoryscape. I would like to note that the term memoryscape has been widely used in memory studies, mainly as a synonym for the mnemonic place occupied by museums, squares, statues, and other material objects. Nevertheless, I think that in order to understand the memoryscape processes of implementation, legitimization, and naturalization, we should have in mind a broader perspective, which does not merely focus on materializations of memory in concrete physical spaces, but also in an integrated analysis of the materiality, politics, and social imaginary involved in its composition, in the composition of the memoryscapes. For many reasons, never existed in Portugal a socially broad process of critical reflection on the colonial past, as, for example, is occurring currently in many countries, as Anna Milosevic talked about the Belgian case right now. Portuguese case, it's still this critical refraction is still not ongoing. This aspect produces an apparent paradox. The stronger this imaginary is, the more it becomes invisible, precisely because it is so present that it appears as naturalized. As Anne Rini wrote once in a text about monuments, and I quote, is ironically the lack of unanimity that keeps some memory sites alive. The same could be generically said about the representations of the past. And that's why mnemonic disputes has a civic and democratic role. On this particular, I would like to mention some discussions arose in Portugal from 2070 on. I will enumerate some without pretending to be exhaustive. In April 2017, the President of the Republic, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, visited the island of Gorée in Senegal, a space once used for trafficking enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. There, he highlighted the supposedly pioneering role that Portuguese authorities played in the abolition of slavery in 1761. In fact, the date does not signal the abolition of the slave trade throughout the empire, but the end of slave traffic to the metropolis, concentrating it instead in Brazil. The presidential statements triggered an open letter in which the signatories criticized, and I quote, the idealistic and exceptionalistic view of the colonial legacy of Portuguese history. In the same year, 2017, the placement in Lisbon of a statue of Padre António Vieira, in which the Jesuit priest appears wielding a cross and with indigenous children at his feet, would fuel various gestures of contestation, the most recent of which was in June this year, in the context, in fact, in the context of big anti-racist demonstrations after the assassination of George Floyd, and also in Portugal, in Lisbon, there was a big demonstration, anti-racist demonstration, and in that day, the statue of Padre António Vieira some anonymous hands wrote the word decolonize on the statue and drew small red hearts on the three children, motivating a lively debate. There's a photo on that in the screen. Similarly, back in 2017, one of the proposals submitted and selected for the participatory budget of Lisbon came from JAS, an association of Afro-descendants, and advocates the creation of a memorial of homage to enslaved people. The winning project was presented by the Angolan artist Quiloange Quiaenda, and it is now in the implementation phase. However, the proposal to create a museum of the discovery in the city of Lisbon, which appeared shortly afterwards, was the one that was more debated. The idea had been launched by the winning socialist candidacy for the local municipality within the framework of tourist growth in the country's capital. The designation of a Museum of the Discovery, Museu da Descoberta, and not discoveries, descobertas or descobrimentos, trying somehow obscure resignification, has been contested by some sectors of academia and civil society. As said in a collective open letter, did the African, Asian, and American peoples with millenary histories feel discovered by the Portuguese? And how will the populations from these territories feel today when visiting a museum space that deprives their ancestors of historical initiative, reducing their role to objects to be discovered, often violently, by the Portuguese. End quote. However, a considerable number of opinion articles on the topic in the press reaffirmed the place of overseas expansion in the national identity, censoring the existence of supposed penitential narratives in some engaged sectors of public opinion, in the public opinion. From my point of view, this is explained by the persistence of what I defined in a text about nations representations in Cavaco Silva presidential speeches as an amnesic memory. I mean, narrative forms of framing the past that actively produce selective images. In this specific case, these evocations are expressed through a double mechanism of revelation and concealment. On the one hand, the narratives associated with the singularity of the Portuguese expansion are valued. On the other hand, its discursive concretization operates semantic reconfigurations through which the violent dimension of colonialism and the traumatic way in which the imperial cycle ended with a defeated war was silenced. An expression of this in Cavaco Silva's presidential speeches is present in the words he chooses to say, for instance, Portuguese language, heritage, sea, cultural encounters, Europe, but also in those that he chooses to suppress. Terms like colonialism, colonization, racism, or slavery never appear in that speeches. To conclude, colonial heritage exists beyond the statues and the museum walls. Colonial implications are still alive in celebrations, in political discourse, in public representations of the nation, and in the effective hierarchies of citizenship. As a matter of fact, decolonization is not exclusively a transfer of power from Europeans to former colonized territories. It is coming to terms with the disappearance of the colonial order that favored European countries, confronting imperial legacies and reflecting upon contemporary citizenship as inhabited by what Michael Rothberg in a recent book called implicated subjects, who have contributed to or benefit from regimes of domination. Today's Portugal is not the imperial power that went through much of this 20th century as a colonizing, though semi-peripheral, metropolis. However, still exists a sort of what I call imperiophilia that induces a significant number of representations about its identity and its history. The incessant reproduction of the same narrative has been challenged in the recent years, as I illustrated, although it is difficult to anticipate how this process will unfold in the future. We only know that it will have an effective role in the mnemonic, epistemological, and political debates that are yet to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel, for this very interesting presentation. I really didn't know many of the examples that you shared with us. And we will continue now with the last presentation, and then we'll have some, sorry, I put the video on now, yes. I was saying that we will continue with the last presentation, and then at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. The last presentation is will be shared by Alexandra Hill and Celia Zayas, both of them consultants and researchers at the organization called Culture Solutions. Culture Solutions aims to provide an analysis of the current state of the EU external action in terms of culture. And specifically, Alexandra and Celia are working within this organization to find the key concepts and measures that should be present for decolonizing EU policy, exterior policy in the field of culture. So Celia, Alexandra, we are very keen to hear your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Oriol. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm unable to open my video either. Let me try again. Well, I'll try to fix it later. So thank you all for your presentation, and thank you to the European Observatory on Memories for the invitation. So as Oriol just said, my name is Alexandra, and together with Celia, we will be delivering this brief presentation on behalf of Culture Solutions, that is an independent, non-for-profit social innovation group, contributing to the excellence of EU international cultural relations. What we will discuss here is the result of research and internal discussions by a group, and does not necessarily reflect the official view of the organization. So today we will be speaking about EU external cultural action and colonization. We start from the assumption that, as Roberto Rocco says, colonization is not only a common shared past, but it is also at the heart of the European Union integration itself. It is central to the past and to the current place of the European Union in the world. And the relationship between the EU and colonialism entangles for us two different viewpoints of analysis. One would be its past, how the EU deals, how the EU narrates colonial memories. And the second one would be its present, or if the EU really takes advantage of unequal power relations to build dependency relations with other countries. That is neo-colonial or post-colonial relations. Their main characteristic is that this is not done by coercive measures, but by indirect means, as it could be official development aid, trade agreements, security cooperation, cultural relations. So, as per the relationship with colonial memories, the European Union has not released official political statements to apologize for its bloody past. And even if the institution as such did not exist when its member states' colonization experience years later, the European Parliament has included the topic in a number of resolutions that deal particularly with the commemoration of human rights violations that took place within the territory of the European Union. And in this sense, a number of scholars criticize the fact that EU efforts for historical remembrance have focused almost exclusively, and I read, on the Holocaust and National Socialism as well as Stalinism, which could be somehow interpreted as a sort of gesture towards Eastern European countries, especially since the enlargement of 2004, some of which, like Poland, have actually made memorial policies a strong component of their cultural diplomacy. But, and I read again, it remains curiously quiet about the memories of imperialism and colonialism. An interesting example illustrating this statement is the recent analysis about the narratives used at the House of European History, that is a museum opened in May 2017, under the initiative of the European Parliament, that we can discuss in the debate afterwards if you deem it of interest. But before moving on, we'd like to highlight very briefly one of the most recent European Parliament resolutions that brought the issue of colonialism to the table, on ending racist discrimination against Afro-European people in the EU. In this resolution, members of the European Parliament suggested that the European Union and its member states should tackle the structural racism people in Africa of African descent face in Europe. But it also suggests to carry out reparations, such as apologizing publicly, returning stolen artifacts to their countries of origin, or amongst others, presenting a comprehensive perspective on colonialism and slavery in the educational curricula. So before I give the floor to Celia, Culture is an area in which both perspectives collide, since it is through culture that we portray the past and build a common identity. And here it is worth mentioning the great deal of value given by the European Union to the protection of cultural heritage. But also, it is frequently framed, and particularly in the case of cultural relations, in terms of soft power as a means to persuade and construct hegemony without coercion. EU cultural relations, if considered as a means for post-colonial relations, are, however, intrinsically different from other international policies in their own nature. While in development, trade, security, or energy, the ownership of the object or the value is frequently unidirectional, which determines straight away the leverage of the partners, culture is not exclusive from the European Union. It exists everywhere, and it can even be considered as a common good for all parties. Indeed, cultural goods and services are a worldwide phenomenon. Thus, cultural relations as a means for domination would be the result of the fictional attribution of a higher value to some cultures amongst others. And this is done through the creation and modification of symbols, to which the discourse is central. But which elements can characterize a discourse or a policy as neo-colonial or post-colonial? There is no clear answer for this question, but we ought to look to the who and the what. Who takes part in the decision-making process, so the agency, and how is the other represented, so the messaging.
And now continue. Thank you, Alexandra. I don't know, you can hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the EU messaging find this more obvious point on the policy documents, and we will dig a little deeper into the most relevant ones, but just a quick remark. The EU external action works through a network of youth delegations, and in the case of the cultural action, also through EUNIC clusters. EUNIC is the network of European International Institutes for Culture, and they have increasingly spread all over the world. So EU delegations combine international cultural relations priorities and approach with country-specific thematic priorities. Are they expected to tailor the priorities of the policy document to the reality of the local cultural context? And the role of the EU delegations on this matter, as well as the EUNIC model, are actually analyzed in the research report of Culture Solutions, Composing Trust. Our starting point for concerning the cultural policies is a European Agenda for Culture in a Globalizing World of 2007. It underlined that the role of culture as a tool for soft power, and that the EU is and must aspire to become even more. But today, the EU external cultural action is guided by a joint communication of 2016, and before its approval, the Commission commanded a pool of experts to prepare a preparatory action in order to advance knowledge and reflection on the role of culture in external cultural relations, as well as to make for a strategy in the field. The preparatory action is called Engaging the World Towards Global Cultural Citizenship, and this initiative is very interesting because it acknowledges colonialism as the origin of long-standing and strong cultural ties between European countries and third countries. Although it also recognizes that the nature of these relations may be different, and for instance, the relations of Algerian citizens may have with France may be different from the ones that they have with the rest of the EU population. It also recognizes that because of the colonial past, the EU is frequently perceived as a neo-colonial partner, and this hinders trust in the EU, who is perceived to be pursuing its own agenda and thus instrumentalizing culture. This image, while combined with a recognized dependence on funding from EU donors to carry out international cultural relations, they make that neighborhood countries and strategic partnerships countries, they, and I quote, they feel uneasy with the dependency implied in the existing donor-recipient relationship. And it calls for a spirit of partnership that is built on mutual learning and exchange and equality of position. Then this preparatory action, actually, it assumes a quite a strong decolonial approach, daring to talk about the elephant of the room. And this participative process was the basis on which the joint communication of 2016 towards a new strategy for international cultural relations was built. This document is very important because it says strategy and culture for the entire EU external action. But the question there is if it's built on the decolonial perspective that is brought by the preparatory action. And in short, our analysis showed that it's different from a good intention, but it could actually be improved. And although a deeper research could and shall be done, there are some remarks that can be highlighted in this sense. The first is that cultural diversity is present since the very first sentence of this young communication, as we see here in the quote. It actually makes a significant effort in promoting intercultural dialogue, and it explicitly supports the need for establishing dialogue with local stakeholders. However, the joint communications does not make any reference to the weight of the colonial history in the relationship with the partner countries. And also, it frames cultural relations as a tool for promoting a global order at the European style. Therefore, in terms of soft power, which leaves the room open for instrumentalizing culture. And actually, these quotations that where it refers to soft power are part of the introduction of the document and not only of the part dedicated to cultural diplomacy. This is problematic because it risks that this approach is mainstream to the entire scope of EU cultural relations, that is, including culture for development, intercultural dialogue for peace, and international cooperation on cultural heritage. And in this regard, the joint communication, we consider that it did not do a substantial follow-up on the decolonial approach of the preparatory action, nor did the latest EU strategy on culture, the new European Agenda of 2018, which in the part dedicated to external cultural relations, it briefly reveals on the joint communication of 2016 on similar terms. The third point then is how to implement, like how is the implementation of these documents. The final and the central question then is if the EU develops its external cultural action decolonially. But what does it mean? There is no guide for this, but the postcolonial theories actively call for two elements. First, to recognize one's privilege, and second, to listen. And when conceptualizing, designing, and acting, the EU needs to recognize that it is not and it cannot be a neutral actor, but it is part of our relationships. Also, it needs to avoid the colonialist move, as Chandana Mohanty created the terms in 1984. That is, it needs to avoid to develop a narrative of the other that puts the EU in a position in which it is legitimated to decide what is best for the other. And instead, it should just listen and give agency and involvement in all the decision-making process. Another conceptual and practical resource for decolonized approaches is intercultural communication and intercultural approaches to international cooperation. And in a more practical way, it would mean to involve local actors in all stages of cultural relations, to put resources at the service of their identified needs, and to engage in a true equal-to-equal dialogue in which cultural goods and services are equally valued from both sides. And in this regard, the role of youth delegations, as outlined in the Culture Solutions report, is absolutely essential. Because by engaging with local stakeholders and adapting the general policy frameworks to their context, they are the front runners in decolonizing the praxis from the institutional culture through healthy consultations, redesigning priorities, and allocating economic resources to the needs identified by the local actors. And those are some of the key issues that can be done. And I pass it over to Alexandra.
So to conclude, despite attempts to decolonize European external cultural policy frameworks, we believe more advocacy, desk, and field work remains to be done. In short, words are there, but deeds are still missing. There is room for an ambitious agenda that should mix historical, sociological, cultural, and political approaches to address, discuss, and manage European colonial memories. In our opinion, post-colonial relations lack a solid cultural dimension, and we firmly believe more cultural action would help improve those. EU international cultural relations could be a front-runner for a renewed approach to foreign policy that avoids neo-colonial behaviors. From a macro perspective on strategy design and policy narratives, a deeper and coordinated connection between internal and external EU policies could help addressing key issues such as migration, the role of diasporas, or post-colonialism. European citizens themselves have painful memories of intra-European conquests and invasions that left deep scars and still affect contemporary relations. And these memories are intertwined with intercontinental colonial memories as much as intra-African and intra-American memories of domination and internal colonization. It is also interesting to think then an integral approach to decolonization could even work as a new push to the European identity narrative and to a more inclusive EU project, truly united in diversity. In third countries, such an approach would have to be embedded in country-specific EU cultural strategies, combining European Union and member states' cultural priorities.
Yes, from a more micro perspective, we've seen that the EU political change of paradigm has established principles such as mutual dialogue, people-to-people approach, or bottom-up initiatives and co-creation that are paving the way towards a more horizontal relations with partners. The more recent global backslash of multilateralism and the sort of return to realist politics, however, has switched the discourse again towards terms such as the language of power or a geopolitical commission. And this is an approach that risks superposing geopolitical interests onto building a fair and respectful relation. So we will see in the future if the two kind of messages that we hear in the slide are compatible or not. And actually, decolonizing the praxis of EU external cultural action goes through reassessing the long-term strategic nature of interculturality and its potential for peaceful coexistence and mutual respect. But how to do this in practice? Well, recommendations in the field of EU cultural cooperation cover an array of actions that could solve misinterpretations at the implementation phase, some of them being common to the cooperation for development in general, such as the use of non-European languages or prioritizing local expertise among European expertise. And in this regard, EU delegations have a really key role in the short term to decolonize their institutional culture and functioning as the key actors in building partnerships of mutual dialogue and engaging in people-to-people relations or acting as speakers of bottom-up initiatives. Even for them, the situation can be advantageous because since by not being perceived as imposed, they can benefit from a better climate of understanding that can easily expand to other areas in which EU delegations are working. Thus, the theory is pretty clear, is accept that the EU is not a neutral actor and listen and give voice to the less powerful. The practice needs at the first stage to decolonize the mind, as Frantz Fanon would say, and this is much more difficult. But this is where arts as a tool for challenging representations and meanings is extremely powerful because if arts brought the colonial gaze to the European collective imagination under the pen of Lord Byron, Jules Bernays, or the pens of Agostino Brunias here in the slide, they have also been the forefront of the decolonial gaze, and films, books, performance, or visual arts, such as this painting of Pate Schindele here in the slide, they have been the space for the decolonial discussion. They have been essential for rewriting the symbols and meanings, and in this sense, artistic creations gives voice, and the first step for decolonizing is to start listening. So culture is a tool for social innovation and for social change at the end of the day, and if the EU is willing to engage in decolonizing its praxis, culture can be the perfect scenario for mutual learning, collaboration, and co-creation. And well, thank you very much, and we're open to any further questions.
Thank you very much, Alexandra and Celia, and thank you to all four speakers that started the first panel discussion today. Well, now we'll open the floor to all the attendees, and we can receive questions and comments through the chat. While we are receiving these questions, I can start asking to each of the speakers some ideas that came to my mind while you were speaking. Anna, for instance, Anna Milosevic, you were talking about underrepresented minorities and democratization of memory. And it came to my mind that quite recently in New York City, a new monument to suffragist women, including Black women, was open in Central Park. And the question should be something like, apart from contestation to those offensive monuments, do you think that the building of new monuments like this one that I mentioned can contribute to heal the past human rights disasters, let's say? Micro.
So you're asking a quite complicated question with a very interesting example, I would say. I'm not very convinced that the current use of monuments and memorialization in general is actually contributing to healing the wounds from the past. So when I say this, I mean that, you know, in many cases, we have seen new monuments arising because of this perceived, let's say, public need for a new monument, for, you know, adding these kind of new layers of knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. But the further we go, you know, like from the event or from the person that actually, for an event that actually happened to a present, we are actually building monuments that correspond to the present needs of societies, of political groups, of individuals, etc., etc. Of course, this is not always the case. I'm not saying that this is the general rule. In some instances, you know, you have victims' families, you have descendants of certain groups that find quite important to actually have a monument. And this is some sort of restorative justice for this population. And it's quite beneficial for them. But in terms of healing the wounds of the past, I'm not quite convinced that it actually heals the wounds, but it certainly contributes to the recognition, acknowledgement of their past suffering. And this is, I think, quite important.
Mm-hmm. And is there any example in Belgium, which is your main focus of the research, of a new monument in this regard?
Of a new monument that seeks to address past injustices? Well, on transnational level, this is quite important, and Alexandra and Celia also talked about the House of European History. This is a quite evident example of a monument that seeks to provide this kind of critical assessment of the past, and this kind of new European approach that seeks to pacify the tensions that actually come from the past. So this museum was actually one of the instruments that the European institutions, the EU, have used to induce some sort of reconciliation among European people, some sort of, you know, to create some kind of like a shared narrative, a common thread among different kind of histories, different kind of experiences. This is one example. But another example that also deals with transnational memory politics is the one of a monument that is, well, announced and, you know, kind of built in a close future on the monument that actually seeks to commemorate all the victims of totalitarian regimes. So this monument is supposed to be placed in a small square in front of the European Parliament. And, you know, this has been a quite controversial project and quite controversial monument that actually gives this kind of a huge responsibility, you know, to a monument, to a statue and a construct in an urban space, that, you know, this monument is supposed to kind of pacify the tensions and kind of put on the same level all the victims of all totalitarian and authoritarian regimes in Europe and elsewhere. So this is maybe one of the recent examples of the monuments in Brussels. But, you know, like Brussels is not only a house for the European institutions, but also it's a capital of Belgium. So we have a different kind of national and transnational monuments, and monuments that different kind of diasporic groups also construct. And of course, if we speak about recent monuments in Belgium or elsewhere, I should also mention, you know, the efforts that the civil society and the citizens themselves are making in constructing, in building these kind of spontaneous memorials. Not only maybe, you know, for the terrorist attacks, not only in the remembrance of the people who are killed or people who have died recently, but also, you know, as a sort of a homage to the people who actually do not have a monument. And this is maybe an answer to your question, because a number of manifestations around Brussels actually adhere to this kind of spontaneous democratic expression of memory as a sort of tool to demand an official monument in a public space. And I think this is also quite interesting in modern times.
Okay, thank you, Anna. We'll wait for new questions on the chat. Now I turn to Miguel. I had a question for you, Miguel, but now I'm reading a question that came from the chat, which is very short and very specific. So maybe you can answer it quickly. Where is the head of Salazar monument? Do you know it?
I think no one knows. Well, the image that I show you is from 1975. Someone cut Salazar's head, but then in '78, someone put a bomb in that monument. So it was totally destroyed, the monument, and the community made a fundraising to build another statue dedicated to Salazar, and this was an issue for some years. And in fact, that monument that I show you on the monument to the heroes of the overseas was also a way to stop that discussion that in fact was stopped in the early 80s. But it was also a way to put a step in that issue. And the question of the memorialization of Salazar, in fact returned this year in the last year and during this the last months, in fact, because the municipality of Santa Combadão is organizing a space in the old school where Salazar studied, in the village of Vimieiro, near Santa Combadão, to memorialize the figure of Salazar. And there was a huge contestation on that. In fact, some historians were involved in that proposal, and another historians like myself criticized that proposal, because there was a discussion on whether this space will be a celebration of Salazar or not, despite all the discourse of the municipality that that space will be a space to remember the past, but there is all this discussion about. I mean, the question is: it is possible to remember a figure like Salazar in that particular memorial landscape, his house, his vineyards, his school. So how the space interfere in the way that a particular figure is remembered, socially remembered. So the question of the head of Salazar, in fact, is a huge question, because it came from 75 until today.
Thank you, Miguel. I have another more question for you. I'm translating from Spanish. So the question says, do you know that we can talk about the Iberian model of colonial memories from the lack of revisitation, of addressing that public space and celebrating the for instance, the day of the Hispanidad?
Well, I don't know.
Iberian model.
Yeah, it's a huge question. Also, I don't know quite well how the Spanish cases engage with their own colonial past. So we need to compare it in the more detailed manner. But in the Portuguese case, it is clearly a question of Billig's definition of banal nationalism. So it is clearly something that is really embedded in the national identity, also because Portugal had a really long history of colonialism, and we had the revolution, and this is interesting to compare with the Spanish case, because we had our democracy came from a revolutionary rupture, differently from the Spanish case, but we had no critical reflection on that, on our colonial past, despite the rupture with the dictatorship was really tied with the colonial question, because the captains that made the coup were the captains that were defeated in the war. So this is a very interesting situation to see how some elements were of the past are really important in the way that a country like Portugal frames its narrative about the democracy, but others are really invisible. And the colonial past in the Portuguese case, it's clearly that, despite, and I think my presentation, I think was focusing on that, despite from 2017 on, there is a movement of denaturalize that mnemonic framework.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And now 2 questions for Alexandra and Celia. Maybe one of you can answer one and the other one can answer the second one. I don't know. The first one says, the decolonization of EU cultural policies seems more a question of actual implementation than theory, compared to other major international actors like USA, China, Turkey. Is that right?
Actually, in our presentation, we went through the policy documents, like the theory, and we see that theory kind of has the principle, like the principle of people-to-people approach, mutual dialogue, mutual respect. Then the question is how it is implemented, and if these principles are translated into mainstreaming a decolonized approach in every single action that the EU does in external cultural action, right? So I would say that definitely, like, it's mostly a matter of implementation rather than of the theory. I don't know if Alexandra wants to add something.
Mm-hmm. And the second question, maybe for you, Alexandra, is local cultural and creative industries from third countries sometimes need and look for help and support from the EU in a neo-colonial way?
Maybe yes, because they might benefit from some of the fundings that they receive. I would say that this is actually the role of the EU delegations to decolonize that way, actually, and to really hear what the local people needs, what the local people really wants to move further on in terms of cultural cooperations. I think there are good examples of this in terms of like big projects that are South-South cooperation projects, such as Procultura, that promotes South-South exchanges between Brazil and other Lusophone countries, or triangular projects together with UNESCO, such as Transcultura, based in Cuba and in Jamaica, for instance, that deals with Caribbean cultural heritage from a more regional perspective. So I think that is actually the role of the EU delegations and the other partners to decolonize and to kind of prevent our cultural cooperation projects from having this neo-colonial approach.
Thank you. We have another question for you, but it's very long. It's more a comment than a question. So you can read it on the chat, because I'm not able to summarize it all. And the final question says something like, in this don't we risk to use intercultural policies as a too naive tool to keep silencing voices while making think policymakers that something is improving while it's not?
Yeah, I actually kind of read that question. I think that actually the basis of intercultural policies are those principles that Celia just mentioned about spirit of reciprocity, going from messaging to listening, co-creating together with everyone from a bottom-up approach. So I would say that intercultural relations should never miss hearing these minorities or this, I think the question referred to migrants that this person referred to. So we shouldn't miss those.
Thank you. And from your presentation, I was thinking, so you mentioned several times the EU delegations in the third countries, and I know that they have means to promote projects between the member states, the EU member states, and those countries where the delegations are based. And I've also read that both of you have been living in Cuba, in the island of Cuba. So maybe you know and can share with us any specific or successful, hopefully, project promoting this mutual learning that you were mentioning from a decolonial perspective?
Yeah, well, I think it is key to understand that we are moving from perspective of like showcasing our culture to a perspective of real change. So actually, maybe Celia, you want to mention the example of the film festival, for instance, and I could mention a nice example from Senegal.
Yes, I can talk maybe about the European Film Festival because this is an initiative that the EU has kind of mainstreams among all the EU delegations. So like it's kind of a central activity of every EU delegation in the world. And it's true that this European Film Festival was more portrayed as a showcasing of European cinema outside of Europe. And it's interesting how at the same time that we have this kind of project, we also have other projects such as Transcultura that Alexandra was mentioning, which are more looking for this cultural dialogue among parties and more equal to equal dialogue, which is something also very interesting that shows how maybe the paradigm is a little bit changing, which is good.
Yeah, the example I know from Senegal was in the Biennale of Contemporary Arts. I think that was 2016. The European Union wanted to give funding to that Biennale, and it was actually framed that funding through the EUNIC, that are the European Union national institutions of culture that were based in Senegal. So actually, I think we did a really nice work. At that time, I was working there because we met with curators, with artists from Senegal, and we kind of requested or asked what were their needs or what would they want to see at the Biennale. And we actually came up with the design of a very interesting project on video mapping. So it was about developing capacities. We brought 3 experts on video mapping from Germany, Spain, and France, and they all made capacity building trainings in which they developed capacities on specific video mapping techniques to 5 Senegalese artists each. They would be showcasing the result of their work in 3 magnificent different facades from the city. And then actually the project also managed to bring technical big equipments that actually came from Europe, I think, and were then left in Dakar. So when these artists, these 3 European artists left, capacity building was reached. These artists knew about video mapping, and it was the very first time such a big video mapping project was shown in Dakar, in Senegal, in West Africa, actually.
Well, thank you again to the 4 speakers. It has been really, really enlightening, all your presentations. And I hope that you contributed a bit to clarify this broad panorama that we we are addressing since couple of decades, I think, in not only in Europe, but in other parts of the world. Well, now I think I'm not missing any other questions that came from the chat. So thank you. And now we have a 15 minutes break, and we invite you to attend the second panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, just a reminder, you can leave the room, but it would be better if you could stay here with us with your cameras and micros in off. Okay, thank you very much.